Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today for the Finding the Beauty Within Tragedy Summit. Today, I have a wonderful guest that's going to share such a remarkable story about grief and loss as a partner, as a spouse. And his name is Brian Hartzman. How are you today?
Good. How are you? It's nice to be here.
Good. Thanks so much for joining us. And Brian comes to us with a background of 20 years in the tech industry and then had a new reentry into life after he had suffered from grief. And he's going to get into all of that. He is now a grief counselor. He's trained as a life reentry practitioner. He's also a death doula, and he is involved heavily in the grief community of bereavement and support groups. And he has a real passion for introducing men into this space and letting them feel their vulnerability and expression of their emotions. So happy to have you here today.
Thank you.
And we're going to jump right into our questioning, and we're going to go back and storytell. So I would love for you to take us along the journey of your life. You have a first marriage and you were in the tech industry, and I'm going to let you take it from there and weave the path for us.
All right. My life, my journey was I guess in my 20s out of college, I was doing everything that I felt I was supposed to do as a young man in our society. I got a job in the tech industry. I got married relatively young, a couple years out of college. And my first wife and I started a family, had two kids, and found, I guess, at that point that we'd been living our lives the way that we believed we were supposed to, and personify who we believed we were supposed to be. And at a point, realized that wasn't who we were. And I don't think any divorce or separation is like necessarily a happy experience for anyone. It was hard for us getting to that point, but fortunately we went through our own couples counseling, and by the time we decided to separate and divorce, we understood a lot about each other and understood the reasons for why we separated, and that it wasn't about her or me. It was about our own stuff that we brought into it and our own misconceptions that we brought into the relationship. That made it a really a good transition, I think, for when I met my second wife, Melissa. Our relationship, we started off across the country, really got to know each other through a lot of talking and communicating, and we got to a point where in our lives where we knew who we were. And I have to really credit my first marriage and the failure of my first marriage for knowing who I was and for knowing how I could be in a relationship as opposed to how I was supposed to be in a relationship. And I also have to give my wife, Melissa, credit for when she moved out here. She was probably about 30 and an independent woman who had no conception of wanting to get married or have kids. And all of a sudden she took on a relationship with not only a single dad, but a single dad who had a close and very involved relationship with his ex-wife, which is not an easy situation to, I think, move into. And she actually suggested that we do some preemptive couples counseling to address all these challenges that we might come up with. And it really allowed us to live and have a relationship with intention. And a lot of the stuff that might get unsaid but leave hurt feelings or something, we got to address essentially with a mediator before they came up. And we really got to decide how we wanted to have our relationship. And it worked out great. We ended up having a really great co-parenting relationship with my first wife. Sometimes the three of us going to school sessions together, going to events together, or going to parent-teacher conferences together. When we would have the kids, my ex-wife would come over and just be like, Melissa, thank you so much for cooking for my kids. Like, I'm an awful cook. Thank you for doing this. It was really a good, for having so many opportunities for discomfort. It was a great relationship. And by the time we got married, it was really, it felt like everything was working the way, like everything, all the struggles that I'd had previously, the perceived failures for having failed in my first marriage, and trying to look at, nobody wants to be a divorced parent with their kids and have their kids, you hear all the horror stories, and for all the perceived failures, everything seemed to have kind of come to a really better resolution. I was able to have a relationship that I wanted to have, one that, live with intention with who I am and who I wanted to be. And we really, all of us kind of grew out of it.
And I love that so much. There's so many things I love about this. I just want to take a pause for a second because you and I share in this space. So I can really relate to you on this. The new man that I'm with now, I call him my soul partner. I also call him my husband, but we're not technically married. We came into our relationship, we brought kids in together, and having the relationship with his ex-wife, she's one of my dearest friends, and we get along great. We co-parent great. And to have that type of a relationship, if you can cultivate that from the beginning, is so nice. To have so many people struggle in this area, it can be so toxic and it makes living very, very hard. And so I love that Melissa came up with, this is a great tip and tool for people, that she came up with some preemptive, counseling to understand what this dynamic is like, and really take in things to expect or tools to, work on together. That's a great form of advice if anybody is going through a divorce and into a new relationship. And by the way, that's a state of grief that you are living in too, ending a marriage and then figuring out what that looks like. And people forget to stop and reflect on and give themselves grace during that time, because that is a grief process. So you are already in that grief process. And then to find your wife that you're going to start this new life with, to have her be so open and willing to do this is beautiful and wonderful. So I just wanted to pause and say, take a look at that if that's the situation you're in, because it really can be a beautiful, well-rounded co-parenting life if you put the effort in.
Exactly. And to the one thing you said about it being that was a grief that I went through, that's one of the things that I've learned after more, especially after my wife died, and after, not to spoilers, but after all that, but as I was struggling with my own intense grief, and I started looking at and working with other people's grief, I really came to understand that grief it's the loss of an expected future. This is what your future is going to be, and all of a sudden it evaporates from in front of you, and you're kind of stuck, lost with how do I proceed with this? And that really was, so divorce for a lot of people is a grief like that, because you have this expectation, you're going to be with this person for the rest of your life, you're going to have this life together, and all of a sudden that whole vision just falls apart.
Yeah, absolutely. It does. And that's when you don't understand that you're in grief. It's so confusing, right? To be in that space of like, what are these emotions? Why am I feeling like, what am I supposed to do with all of this? It really is a process to work through after or going through a divorce. Like there's a lot of layers. So don't disregard all those emotions, really dig into them. So I commend you for that. And then moving forward. And then, so now you're taking us into the stage of you are with Melissa, you met Melissa, and you are getting married, and life keeps happening.
Yes, yes, it does. And that's definitely the lesson, that one of the lessons I got out of that is life definitely happens, no matter how good and how good you feel like you're doing, how much you're participating. Like, life happens. And so we got married in October of 2012, and we were planning our honeymoon for that following summer, because we were going to do an Alaskan cruise. And that January, so not even 2 months after we were married, we found a lump in our breast, and it was, you have that oh shit moment, and what do we do? And it but at the same time, the world, the culture, like you see all this Susan B. Komen breast cancer awareness stuff, and it was definitely clearly a lump, but it was we weren't terribly scared about it yet, because there are all these women always marching who've survived breast cancer, all these breast cancer survivors. So it's like, well, it's not pancreatic cancer, it's something that people survive. And so went through the the initial, which are I think probably some of the hardest stages for people, is the waiting. You wait to get an appointment, get your mammogram, wait for the results, then it was just it was bad news after bad news with that. Turns out it was triple negative breast cancer, which is it's one of the more aggressive forms of breast cancer. It's and it's not estrogen based, so it can't be treated as easily with hormones or immunotherapy. A battle was coming before us, and I don't think we realized quite the gravity of what we were going to go through. And so we canceled our honeymoon and kind of buckled down for cancer and for chemo and treatment, which took almost pretty much the entire year. Was a year of weekly chemo treatments, or every other week, I think it was, probably for 16 weeks or 16 rounds. I can't remember the details. And then surgery, then radiation, then recovery. But it was also a really transformative period for us. It was a period of our lives where we really started living with how we wanted to live. I stopped checking email in the evenings after work because it was just, that wasn't important. Spending time with my wife was important. And all those shifts started happening about what's actually important. When she felt good in between, in the times in between the end of one chemo and the next one, if she was feeling good, we went out for burgers, or we went out to dinner, or it was funny. I think one of her first questions to the doctor was, like, while she was in treatment, was, "Can I have wine?" And like, "I don't know, can you?" And he's like, "Sure." Like, there's nothing, like, there's no interaction, so as long as you can taste it, you should have it.
Right? Why not?
With chemo, your taste buds tend to shift, and so, which is, honestly, she was a big foodie, and so that was probably, that may have been a more traumatic loss for her than her hair or the cancer was. I can't taste as much, then so anytime she could taste, that really was very symbolic. It's like, I want to taste everything, and we really kind of tried to live as best as we could in between, whether it's taking day trips or just not stressing about things at work, because it's not, turns out it doesn't matter.
You're really being grounded in the present, which is what we hope that we all do, but we lose sight of it until something like this happens, and it brings us back to the reality of, like, this is our life. We get to be present in these moments and have fun, and not be on our email and not be on our phone and do all of these things. And how else were you dealing with the emotion? You're in the phase of being a newlywed as well, and getting the hardest news that a couple can get in the first, well, I shouldn't say, there's lots of hard news. Let me retract. But one of the worst things that you want to hear, right? And so how are you dealing with the emotions of living this life, right? Being present in the moment, being strong, like being optimistic. Explain what that's like. So I'm sure a lot of people would love to relate to that process as well.
It was a bit of a yo-yo for me, and for us, we especially because of how our relationship started, coming out of figuring out who we were, being intentional with who we were and how we wanted to live and how we wanted our relationship to be. We brought that into our approach with treatment. Was just we tried to be very positive about it. The power of, I think a few years, probably maybe about 10 years before, but I think influential in our in that time period was, like, the book The Secret, talking about the power of positive thinking, and it was just, and so there's a logical part for me that was like, well, I have two choices here. I can be stressed out and scared, or I can be positive, and so I'll just be positive. And I think, and that part of that was me trying to, I think, hide from being scared, but part of it was also, that was our relationship, was being positive and intentional. And we kind of made fun with it. We especially she had some challenges with some of the chemo, and so we would be at the hospital for an entire day for her chemo infusions. And she joked that I was her chemo Sherpa. I had my backpacks with all of our food and our laptops so we could do work, and we watched TV, and we always had fun with it as we went through everything. And it was just like, all right, this is what we're doing now, and so we'll go do that. And so we really tried to live with intention and positivity, and the power of, if we're positive about this, then at the very least, that can't hurt her body. Positivity. Right. There's anecdotal evidence about laughing and joy and how that can actually help promote healing. And whether or not we fully bought into that, it was better than the alternative. And so we lived in that. At the same time, one thing I forgot about was my doctors ended up putting me on on baby aspirin because they said my blood pressure was borderline event worthy. So while I was being positive, apparently my body, I think I was storing up a lot of my own anxiety, and I was also, every moment of every day was trying to balance being a father, being a good employee, and taking care of my wife. And there wasn't enough time in the day to do all of that, and so I sacrificed, I think, myself and my health for it. There was a study they actually that they had me in for called Helping Her Heal, and it was trying to study the impacts of caretaking on spouses. And it was ultimately, I don't think, like, how do you convince someone to give a little bit less when they feel like their spouse's well-being and life is on the line? And I don't think you can. So it was definitely taking its toll on me, but we really, we together especially lived with intention and positivity through most of it. And we were very positive through it. It was kind of fun to see the impact of that on our friends as well, starting to kind of pull along with our like, wow, they're going through this and they haven't missed a beat. So like, why we can do that too.
Right. Well, it's what you put out is what you get back, right? And if that's the space that you want to create, then other people get to fall in alignment with that as well too. And you bring up a great point too. There are a lot of studies and research done about caregivers in multitude of scenarios. And something to take away if you're living in this space right now that Brian was in, we do forget about ourselves when you're taking care of someone else. We completely just disregard because we're like, okay, well, I'm not the sick one. And I get to put all my efforts into taking care of and being, that's what you want to do, right? That's exactly where your heart is being pulled to. But at the same time, we can't forget about ourselves, because when our weakness and our health shuts down, then we can't be good for anybody. And so if you're in that space and you're feeling like you're run down, or you're feeling like you need something more, ask for help, take a nap, get the sleep. Like, there's so many things that you can do for yourself as a caregiver, but the caregiver really does suffer to an extent of putting themselves on this back burner too. So we get to take care of ourselves in that regard. So I'm really glad that you brought that to light. And at the same time, now your children are how old at this stage?
Let's see, they were still pretty, I think they were 4 and 7 when we got together. So I want to say, I think they were 11 and 8 when she died. So probably 7 and 10, I think. Not 7 and 10 roughly. And
that is such a formative stage of life, right? And so how at this stage are you communicating with them and allowing them to understand and process what's going on? They're really they're on the front lines of seeing everything. I think we brought them to the hospital a couple of times just kind of to see what it was like, to see that it wasn't scary and to kind of see her in this. But they got to be on the front lines of it. It was my daughter, I think, was a little bit young to fully grasp and understand what was going on. She just knew that Melissa was sick. My son, he really leaned into the breast cancer
awareness, pink ribbons everywhere, both in school. His essays in school started reflecting what we were going through. He really, and both the kids really were attached to her. She was very, very much a parent at this point.
Yeah.
And so it was an interesting, I think, a difficult shift for all of us to go from this kind of fun, festive family life to, we're not quite sure. What's Melissa doing today? Is she going to be in bed today, or is she going to be down? What's the part of it though? Like with her having some time off from work occasionally, she was able to spend more time with them, and so it just became this weird flow that I think kids with sick parents get to experience. I am grateful. My ex-wife at this point, like I said earlier, we had this really strong parenting relationship, and so if we needed to have harder conversations about it or to explain things, she would often come over so that the three of us were talking about what's going on and how it's going to affect our family and how it won't affect our family. And she was really good at organizing help and response with other families that we were all friends with. And if we had, whether either taking the kids, if we had we're having a surgery coming up or something like that, she would often take them so that we didn't have to balance all of those things. So it was easier than I think some people have to go through, because we had that extra support, both from friends and from their mom, and she was also then able to talk with them and feel out what they were feeling that they weren't necessarily comfortable or able to say to us directly. So it really also gave the kids an outlet, which was really helpful. But I think that was, and we did try to make a lot of fun out of it too. I remember when my wife finally started losing her hair, my son and I both shaved our heads. It was one thing that he wanted to do. He wanted to shave his head for her, and so we did that. The diagnosis that we got for the cancer came in on Valentine's Day, and so the next Valentine's Day, both the kids and my wife pulled together this. It was a red and pink dinner, where we had, red glasses and red plates, and we used red food coloring in the food that we were eating, or to make things pink and red, and drank out of Twizzlers. It was straws, and so there was a lot of doing those types of things together to kind of be like, all right, we're being, sharing the positive and proactiveness.
Yeah.
They also had to watch the kind of the yuck of it, and watch because chemo is it's not a pretty process to watch someone go through.
No, it's not. And that's a great way to show how there still can be celebration and fun during an unknown, complicated time, right? You can still live in celebration. You can still live in fun. That's what it's all about. And so it's a great representation of how you guys really enacted that mentality and positivity into life. And we forget about that a lot, right? You're like, oh, I'm so consumed by the messiness of this, the darkness of this. But it's moments that you really get to have together as a family and sharing things that make it livable, make it fun, and you can have fun with it. So I'm so glad that you guys did that, and the kids, and you never know how kids are going to take something. So I think your example and how you communicated with them, we want to shield our children so much from life. And in reality, when they see life and they're able to ask questions or interact with complicated times, it almost sets the stage for their own resiliency of how they're going to grow up and handle hard situations too. They won't be afraid to talk about it, right? They won't be afraid, like, I can't verbalize my emotions because this is bad and nobody wants to talk about it or see it, and, cover your eyes type of thing. So I think that was probably a huge aid for them in their lifelong development.
Yeah. And I still see the impacts of that way of being with them. It's one of those, that's one of those odd gifts of grief that kind of like the beauty and tragedy of this is now that my kids, they're 18 and 15, their emotional resilience is remarkable, who they are to their friends, because of the struggles that they've had to go through, the trenches they've had to fight through. I hate that they had to experience those things, but I'm also so grateful that some of the perspectives they had, most of us don't get until we're much later in life, and they get to be that for the world and for their friends. And yeah, it's one of those, it breaks my heart, the things that they've had to experience, but I'm also grateful for the impact it's had on them.
Right. Yeah. They get to, and as a griever and someone living through that process, you get to become an educator too. So they can now educate their peers in such a young generation of learning, which is it is a beautiful thing. That really is a gift. And it's perspective shifting of how you look at your scenario. And we'll get into that more, I know too, but it really is a great thing to think about, of how they are going to be a force for such good and service when other people around them experience that as well too. So that is a beautiful thing. And so now take us through the next stage, right? So we get, you're in chemo and you're getting some news. I know that there's some news coming of goodness.
Yeah, so I mean, the team, the most everything went really great during the whole process. And in fact, even her hair didn't fall out until towards the end. But the chemo it worked really well. The tumor had shrunk to the size of, I think, about a dime. And when we found it in February, it was about the size of an egg already, because it grows really fast. And so the chemo did its job, and then they were able to do surgery. We removed the tumor, and they weren't able to call her cured because the cancer had it was in her lymph nodes, so they had to remove some of the lymph nodes from her arm. And when they had really great margins, but there were a few living cancer cells in the tumor that they removed. So they couldn't call her cured, but they said, you're in remission. Everything's looking really good. Yeah. And so then when she recovered from that, then it was radiation to zap anything else that was left. And it was actually during her radiation time that we got our dog. She decided none of us had ever had a puppy. We always had rescues, and she was like, well, this would be a great time to train a puppy. I'm going to be home for however many weeks on short-term disability. And so we got a puppy, which just brought so much fun and life into our family, a little pug. And it was great. We really kind of, like, everything we started, and that led us to, I think she was done with radiation before that February, that Valentine's Day, where we had this red kind of celebration with the kids. And that summer we redid our honeymoon finally. We upgraded, so we had this fantastic suite on a ship, because by this point we were just like, we're like, everything, we have a new lease on life. Let's just live. And so we upgraded to really celebrate both the, like, being in remission, being able to actually go on honeymoon, go and do things, and we're really living life and living every day. And it was really a new lease on life. It was great. Everything was, it was a good period. And I don't know if that's the right time to go into that. And then the
well, it's, the process that we live in, right? It's such an up and down roller coaster when you're battling something like cancer. And so you've touched on so many different emotional points right now of, it's for your divorce, grief, love, new love, marriage, bad news, grief again, in a sense, right? But then hope, elevation, positivity, celebration, anticipation of what's next. There's so many emotions that are going to, talk about really getting it all in the first year of marriage, really testing what vows mean and really testing what marriage means. And then now you're in this space of, okay, here we are, right? Like we are living life to the absolute fullest. Yeah. And then, and then exactly. Here's the roller coaster, right? Here's the roller coaster of life, and how we bring up our resiliency, how we handle that next, because I know it's coming in the next phase of what's about to come in the story. So why don't you take us into the next year, celebrating your honeymoon, and life is looking really up and going in the right direction.
Life, it was. Life was going And by this point, I'd started a new job and it was, again, just living how we each wanted to live. And we had such a great balance going on with both, with my family, with the kids, with my ex, with our jobs. Our life balance was in harmony. And we really were taking life, taking the bull by the horns. We were just taking life and just going with it at this point. And she even joked, because of the reconstruction after she had the tumor out, the one of her breasts had been reduced, and so then she elected to have the other breast reduced. And she was like, I was thinking about I needed a lift at some point anyway. She's like, so this is great. Like, we literally, I got the boob job. I didn't, like,
right.
For insurance. And, so we were really starting just kind of like all these things that were hard and difficult. We were finding ways to just kind of have fun and have fun with, and really had just, it was a great summer. And then that October, we had this, so we were married in October 2 years before. We got married in a small wedding back east. And so we didn't invite a lot of our friends from out here to the wedding because it was small. It was like 40 people. And we didn't think it was fair to invite people to spend a ton of money to go fly to some remote destination on the East Coast. And we're just, no, that's like, it wasn't how we wanted to do it. Well, they all gave us a hard time for not inviting to our wedding. So in October, we had a celebration of, we're in remission, things are going great. It's our 2-year anniversary. So we had everyone together from out here for like a wedding party, remission party, life party. Everything is going great. And literally that week, we were in the hospital with abdominal pains. And that's when we found tumors on her liver. And it was a real kind of blow of just, kind of like, we have to go through this again. Yeah. But we knew how to do it. We'd done a year of this. We're like, all right, we changed direction again. It was a bit of a gut punch, but it was just like, all right, we know how to do this. We can do this. Yeah. It was a little deflating. I guess we kind of went into it a little deflated, but it was,
as anybody would. You're really right there. You're thinking this is it, and then it's. I can imagine immense deflation, right? Of just, wow, we thought we did this once. Now we get to do it again, and it's frustrating. That is the really frustrating and awful stuff of life. Is just like, all right, once is enough. Once is once too many times, and now here we go.
I learned a lesson. And that was, everything, especially to that point in my life, everything had seemed to have a lesson and like almost like a fade out of it. The reason I went through my divorce and how that all went was to teach me how to be the husband and the man that I wanted to be. And I could be, as opposed to who I felt like I was supposed to be. And so everything that we'd gone through had okay, I went through this to tee this up. And this time it was, that, and just like when we went through cancer, it was, that teed us up to really learn how to live life to its fullest. And it sucked, but we got so much out of it for ourselves and our relationship. So it kind of made it more okay, I guess. But then it's like with this one, it's like, well, what else do we need? What else do we really need to learn from this? Like that's, and so really, I think it's really kind of started to strain our like thinking positively and being like, well, does that work? What is the purpose of that? And
start to question.
And so just more of like, all right, put our boots on and we'll go back through it again because we have to do this. And it was really, I remember like at a point, she would say that she hated it when people called her strong and brave because she's like, what else am I supposed to do? This is surviving. This isn't, I'm not choosing to do this. And so she would get kind of some of the cracks, I guess, in our positivity were starting to show with that.
That's a great, not to interrupt you, but that's also a great point of how other people can support somebody that's going through something like this too, is instead of offering up terms that you think are going to be helpful. Maybe ask what the person is going through, what they're feeling, so that you can support in the best way possible. Because that, as outsiders too, and even as a spouse, so we don't know what to say or do sometimes, right? We don't want to do or say the wrong thing. And sometimes it's not the wrong thing what you say, but it's your approach of how you find out how to support someone. And that is a great representation of someone is coming in and saying, you're a warrior, you're strong, you're brave. And she's like going through something of, I'm being tested right now. I'm being challenged in my positivity because I don't want to do this. This is nothing I'm asking for. So I think that's along the way, right? As we're talking about it, people that go through this, we also turn into educators. And so that's a great thing of ask somebody maybe how they're feeling so that you can phrase your support in the best way possible.
Well, and that's, I think one of the biggest lessons that I got out of that has not only carried me forward in my grief, but also just how I interact with people is, I remember when she was first diagnosed, there was the mom of one of my daughter's best friends had actually, we didn't know this until after the fact, had just finished her treatment for the exact same cancer. She, when we ended up telling her, her first response was, damn it. Like she was just angry. And it was that, honestly, like for both of us, was the best response that we got from anybody. It was the one that made us feel the best. It wasn't someone pitying us. It wasn't somebody telling us how sorry they are. What can we do? It was anger. Like this, you shouldn't have to go through this. I'm angry for you. I'm angry with you. Yeah. And that I've since learned, and I think I've heard it quoted actually both from Pema Chodron and Carl Jung, something to the effect of empathy is knowing your own darkness and being able to just sit in someone else's. And so rather than, like, to your point, rather than trying to make someone feel better about it, be positive, just like be like, God, that sucks. Yeah. Like, I'm sorry, that sucks. And just being able to leave it at that, like not try to, and our culture and our society doesn't prepare us for how to do that. And, but that's, and I try to remember that when I'm working, when I meet anyone who's in a tough situation, is like, this sucks, and like acknowledge that it sucks.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's a great way to be, because there's no other way to be with news like that. It is awful. It's awful. But how are we going to react to it? And how would you like me to help you react to it too? Like we both agree, this is awful. And let's sit in it for a minute or 2 or 3 or 10 or however long you want to sit in that space is good. But then it's the transition of, then you need that support in a certain way when you're going through it too, and you're feeling a certain way. Then it's a process, right, of learning about support and how you can support other people. It really is. It's a process to support somebody in the way that they need it. It's very individualized.
Exactly. Especially in the way that they need, which is, it requires looking at someone and understanding them, as opposed to just trying to, as opposed to just bringing a casserole over.
Yes. I call it the casserole crusade of like, everybody comes in with the casseroles, and it's like, that's great. We need to eat, right? Too. A lot of time we don't feel like eating, but it's the casserole crusade, if that's what people think is the best thing to do. And sometimes it is, and sometimes it isn't. So
there's definitely a time for it, but, and that's like one of the things that, I've also learned is that when you're dealing with somebody who's either going through a traumatic experience, like something like cancer or an illness, or for someone who's going through grief, rather than showing up with something to like, this is uncomfortable, so here, this makes me feel better by giving you this. It's not, I'm not doing it for you, I'm doing it for me to make me feel better about it. Right. Sometimes, like, and if you ask somebody, what can I do, then you're putting the onus back on them to like, to tell me how can I feel better and how can I do something. Rather, like, especially if you can take a moment to see what's going on with someone's life, just start doing stuff. Be like, hey, I'm going to come over and I'm going to do your laundry on Saturday. Tell me if there's a better day, but this is what's going to happen. I'm going to come over, I'm going to clean your kitchen. Or I'm going to come over and let's sit and watch a show for an hour. Don't put the onus on them to tell them what do you need to help. Rather, just start doing stuff, because that's what they need. Is they need to have a break, of release from they having to do everything.
Great advice. Such great advice. Really something good to take in and know, because it's the person living in it doesn't know what they need. They don't know what they want. And they don't, it is putting too much pressure on that individual to say, like, they really need a lot of stuff. You really do need a lot, but you're not going to go and ask, right? You're not going to be like, can you come over and do my laundry for me? Like that, it's something, but it's something that is desperately needed. And I'm going to come over and do your laundry for 2 hours, or just give me everything and I'll take it home with me and I'll do it. Right. It's those things of just doing for others and letting them kind of sit back. That's sometimes the best support that you can give.
Exactly.
So great. I'm so glad that we talked about that, because it really is a great way to teach people how to support, properly, or in the way that makes the most sense. So, okay. So take us down the journey of what's coming up next, unfortunately.
Yeah. So, so this round of chemo was a lot more difficult. A stronger chemo was required for trying to get the tumors in the liver, and it became the whole process became a battle of which is going to kill her first. And it was not something that we were expecting or prepared for. We just kind of like, okay, well, we've done this, we know how to do this. And it was setback after setback. The chemo was working, it was starting to shrink the tumors, but then she turned almost alabaster as the chemo was wiping her out, taking all of her white blood cells, her energy. It was, and so we had to then stop the chemo because it wasn't safe for her anymore. But then, well, what do we do? Well, the tumors return. Any progress we were making, it was one step forward, two steps back. We'd had to spend a couple nights in the hospital here and there, and we still, like, I remember, like, we would have fun with it. We went to the hospital for chemo one day. They rejected her for chemo because all of her counts were too low. As they were investigating that, other things started showing up. They had to check. They had to admit us. And so then, like, I remember we posted on Facebook. We're like, all right, sleepover. And there was a song that we had with the kids for, like, one of their bands, like a indie rock band, SLEP over. And so, like, we were like, oh, we're doing an SLEP over at the hospital tonight. And so still having fun with it. But I think it was like one of those times where the doctor, like, he finally was like, all right, this is what liver failure looks like. He's like, and this is what we can do, this is what we can't do. And there's only one outcome for liver failure. And so that was, I think, our first taste of, like, oh, this is different. But it was also, we had all these things that we could go through before we even got close to that point. But and so we just focused on that. We're just kind of looking at the next milepost instead of 10-mile post down. And we're doing well enough with that. Her energy was definitely sapped, but doing okay. And then, like, right around, this was the end of October, and went through, through Thanksgiving, and we actually had a nice trip to Oregon with her family for Thanksgiving, and the kids, and everything was still, like, it was harder, but still going through it. And then over Christmas, everything changed. She just wasn't very communicative, was really struggling with her strength, her energy, her body. And I guess it was like the day after Christmas or so, we ended up bringing her to the hospital for the doctor. They did some scans, and the tumors were growing again because we weren't doing the chemo. And so he was like, all right, well, let's just start doing radiation. Try to see if we can hold them at bay until your body gets to the point where you can accept chemo again. And so we tried that. And then I guess it was the day before New Year's, we took her, but couldn't even get her out of bed. And so we had to get an ambulance to take her to the hospital. And they were like, okay, well, we'll admit her and we'll start doing we'll do radiation from her being admitted to the hospital. And as we got there, they started doing other tests, and that's when we got she has 2 or 3 days to live. Mm-hmm. And we were going in for radiation like that. We weren't going in for her to die. Like that wasn't,
Yeah, it didn't even enter your mind. That wasn't something that was a possibility in your mind and in your heart. And then you get
right.
news like that. It's just life shattering.
Yeah, it was life shattering. And just, that's not where we were. And so it was really, in hindsight, in retrospect, it was one of those things that, we could have and should have seen coming, but just weren't prepared for. And yeah, and so as you can see, I'm able to spend most of my life like with my grief kind of next to me. But every now and then when you get it's always with you, and sometimes the memories are, you remember, especially, and you remember how you were and who you were at that point, and you kind of have perspective, and so sometimes remembering those memories.
Well,
yeah,
that's a great example too, Brian. I love that you just showed your emotion in that way too, which will lead into other things too. But as a man, to be able to let emotion come out and share that, in an interview like this, that's a beautiful thing, right? Because that is real. That's exactly what this summit is all about. That's real life. Great. We will never stop crying about the people that we love.
No.
It's a lifelong, we do walk, our grief is right next to us all the time. It's right here. Right. And it's going to hit us in certain times. It's going to hit us in conversation. It's going to hit us on anniversaries of things and whatever, 10, 20, 30 years down the road. Right. And so it's a beautiful example of exactly how grief works and how emotion is. And it's just something, and people get to lean into that and accept that and be okay with that. Like, that's okay, and that's not an uncomfortable thing. We get to sit here together, and I get to take in that emotion with you as well too, and be comfortable in that space, because that's real life. That's what people go through.
And that's part of that's the grief journey, is that you develop a relationship with it, but it's always with you. It never leaves. You're not better after 6 months, after 6 years. You kind of learn to live with it. In fact, I've had a quote up that I read recently that I love, from Elizabeth Gilbert, and it says, "Grief does not obey your plans or your wishes. Grief will do whatever it wants to you whenever it wants to. In that regard, grief has a lot in common with love."
Amen to that.
Yeah.
Yes. There's so many things about love and grief. The amount of grief we feel is the amount of love that we shared. That pain is really what our love was manifested differently, into a different emotion. And so it's so true. It really is so true. Thank you for sharing that quote. I love Gilbert. So, okay. So you get this news.
Right.
Shock is there. And now what happened?
Well, and then we all bed down and wait and spend time with her. And she had to quick call all the family in, my family, her family, all on the East Coast, fly in, because again, like, none of us were prepared or expecting this. And fortunately, her dad was on a business trip and was able to get there within a few hours of her dying. And so she died the morning of New Year's Eve, and it was the kids got to say goodbye. We all got to say goodbye. It was kind of funny. I think her one of her last words were, like, when we all kind of got the news, she was like, "So we're all okay with this?" Like, and she hadn't spoken for probably about 2 days, really. And that was the last thing that she got out, was just kind of like making sure that we were all kind of, again, on the same page. And it was really, it was tough. It was beautiful. It was, it's one of those things that, when I step into it, it's like a scene from a movie, just kind of watching from the outside, telling the kids and everything. And it was Yeah.
It is like a movie. You really do feel like it's a surreal reality that you're in. You have stepped out of what you knew and you're looking around like, is this actually happening? Like, and that is what it feels like. I remember that feeling. It's like,
Completely.
this cannot be like, and you feel like you are watching your life unfold and crumble and now what, but it doesn't feel real. And then that's your first phase, right? That is the first phase of really understanding and stepping into grief. It's shock, it's anger, it's sadness. It's really all the emotions at once. And then it takes form into the phases that it takes phases in, but it's like, what? Like that's just
it's like a fire hose of just all those emotions at once. And you can't separate them. You can't rationalize them, understand them. It's just, it's a very surreal experience. And it's interesting. Like I have so New Year's Eve is the day that she died. And so every year, New Year's Eve is just kind of like this, what do I do with this day? But I've also, like, as I've reflected on, like, it always hits me weird. And because she died that morning, so then I'm always anticipating like that night to be a problem. But what I really remember was like that night was, I mean, it was sad and it was awful, but it was also all of my friends and family were over at the house, and we were all reminiscing about her, and also really like that, the calm of it's over, like the fight, like, and so that's my memory of New Year's Eve. Like it was like almost the night before that was the emotional hard one, but it was just kind of like it's that piece of like the fight's over. We don't have to fight anymore, and then the celebrating of her life afterwards. So it's one of those, like, it was awful, but also like full of warmth and love, and that's kind of the memory that I have every year.
I love that you have that memory every year. And you also touched on a great point that people kind of shame away from, that feeling you had of, okay, it's over. Like it's that relief is the word that can be used to describe that feeling the most, because it's very real. It's very honest. And it's like your body is holding on to all of the emotion and the tension of an illness, right? Of holding the space for somebody else. And now it's okay. All right. And that is great to be in that space. People want to hide from it and think that I'm a horrible person for feeling this way and I shouldn't be and what is wrong with me? No, that is what we feel when we are releasing something that isn't going to serve us in such a way until we get to our next phase. That's okay. So I'm glad that you brought that to life. It's more than okay. That's such a natural reaction. And I love, we spent a lot of time talking about this story for a reason today, everybody, because it was such a transitional story that we get to touch on so many different topics of emotion and grief and anticipation and fear and scared and positivity. And so that's why we spent most of this interview talking about that, how to relate with children, how to co-parent and create that. And so now, Brian, I want to take us to where you are in your life now. And I want you to be able to enlighten everybody on, what you do as a practitioner. And so let's go into that so that we can shed more light on our journey of where we are. And so fast forward to when you decided to make the choice into, you found a therapist, you went through a couple different therapists, and then you made a decision to become a grief counselor and a life reentry practitioner.
Sure. So I started, it probably took me about 4 months or so, and I to finally decide that I needed help. I really struggled. I really went into like, I unraveled, really is the best way to, I think, put it. And I finally, once I hit rock bottom, I started going to a support group. And because I think the thing that finally got me healing was I heard someone say that they had plenty of people to do things with, but really what they really missed in their life was having someone to do nothing with. And when I heard that, it hit me at my core, and I was like, I heard someone else tell me how I was feeling. Okay, there's stuff I need help with. So I started going to support group, and then that like the next logical step was to go find a therapist. And my initial therapist that I'd had, who helped me through all of my my divorce and my identity as a single dad, and he was great. But what I recognized with him was that I was managing him. I was telling him everything that he needed to hear to tell me how great I was doing in my grief and my healing. And it was complicated enough for me now, I guess, that what I was going through was deep enough that I needed someone to really like pull me apart from the inside and dig in through, like, not let me get away with that. And I ended up finding a therapist who, he had a Buddhist type of basis to his, at least, understanding in his work. And he really was very good at calling me out on things, drawing me to recognize things, but then also really, really fully get and understand impermanence and presence in life, that everything that we go through, everything that we experience is, life is impermanent. Whatever we're in or experiencing will change. It's not that things that will always get better or things can always get worse. It's just that everything changes. And so really be in the moment, be who you are, and live in that way. And it was very transformative for me. And as I was doing that work with him and really finding peace with my new life that I was living, other changes were happening in my life. I ended up leaving the tech industry that I was in. I had no desire or emotion, no drive anymore for being the best tech worker that I could be, because it had absolutely no impact or bearing in my life. I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I knew that wasn't it for me anymore. So I ended up working with a buddy who was a contractor, just kind of doing like renovations and remodeling, just kind of to keep me busy while and at the same time, with the work I was doing with my therapist, I started, the contributions to my support group were changing. And after group, people would come up to me like, wow, what you said was really impactful. That really helped me with this. And that started happening regularly. But then I also noticed men in my support group kept on leaving. And one of them finally said to me, when I was asking about it, trying to figure out what I'm growing. This is great. I'm really starting to understand life and why these people keep on leaving. And he said, Brian, I don't like having to talk about it, but I don't like being around people who don't get it, which basically meant that he was alone. He didn't, none of his friends, none of his people in his life could understand why he was still grieving at a year, why he was still sad, why he was still sleeping on the couch. He couldn't sleep on his wife's bed. But he didn't like having to talk about that to anybody. And I had to sit in a circle and be like, hi, I'm so-and-so, my person died, this is how my week has been. It was too vulnerable, too exposing for him. And so I kind of got this idea, well, I'll start a support group for widowers that isn't a support group. It's a gathering of men who kind of get to, almost like a fraternity. We get together, we all get it. So you don't have to be around people who don't get it, but you also don't have to talk about it. We just talk about whatever, socialize. Inevitably, it all comes up, but it kind of creates this support network for people, and an ability to either hear or just be, and if not be heard. And then out of that, I was like, oh, I'm really enjoying this. I really I get a lot out of doing that work. And so I took a training as in life reentry with Christina Rasmussen, and became a life reentry practitioner, which really works on and focuses on the idea of when you have a traumatic event, such as losing a spouse or significant other, but any other sort of traumatic, life-changing event like that, you can get stuck, and it kind of comes from your emotion response versus your logical response. Your fight or flight response takes over when your world doesn't feel safe, and then when the world feel safe again, your amygdala will release control and you can go back to living normally. But when something, your whole world shatters, your whole expectation of how your life is supposed to be ends, the world doesn't feel safe anymore, and your emotions don't release control, your amygdala doesn't release control, and you get stuck in this state of not knowing how or why to live anymore. And so the work is on helping people kind of wrestle control back out of their emotions and into life, but really exploring a new life, a new way of being. You can never go back to who you were before this event happened. I will never, any relationship that I have going forward is with me as a widower. I was not a widower when I was with my wife. And so any relationship that I have now is going to be completely different. With how I interact with everybody is completely different because of what I went through. And so, and Christina Rasmussen, she's coined the term second first. You get to kind of, you get to do everything for the first time again. Be this person for the first time.
Well, and I love her approach on that too, because you really are learning how to live a different life, a new way. And then when you talk about trauma, everyone experiences trauma in a different way. So you could be losing cognitive function, you could be losing physical function, there's a lot of things that go on in grief that you don't know. You don't even know what's going to happen. So you are taking baby steps to live again, right? It really is re-entering into life. It's the second firsts. And if you can shift perspective to understand that and accept that, that's what Brian helps you do to get to that stage of this happened and it's awful. But now we get to when you choose to, because you have to make a choice, that this is how you want to live. You want to move forward with your life. When you choose to do that, then you get to find new perspective and awareness of how life can be re-entered into. And that's what you help people walk down those steps, those baby steps of getting back to a new way of living.
Exactly. And then realizing as you're looking at and experiencing this new way of living that you can actually live better. So much of what I like to call it the gift of grief, the beauty of tragedy, is that the preconceptions that you've had about how you're supposed to live, who you're supposed to be, the trappings of life, they don't affect you as much anymore. And so so much of like what I see on different like support groups of widows and widowers is like I don't give an F about things. Like things just don't hit you like they used to. And initially I think in the early stages of grief, it's a negative connotation. You just don't care about stuff anymore. But as you start to really learn how you can live again, it really becomes like, oh, like turns out that just doesn't matter. Turns out it doesn't matter that I missed the show or I was late for that or, whatever it is. Like, it's like, I couldn't figure out how to make dinner tonight for my kids. So we're having frozen food. Like, it doesn't matter. It's all okay.
Right. It's all okay. Yeah.
Things don't weigh you down like they used to. And that it becomes really like, I early on, I struggled with, I love who I am now. I love how I've learned to live. And I would have loved to have shared that with Melissa, but at the same time, it would have been impossible because I couldn't have learned those things without her dying. And that's something that can't ever be rationalized. There's no way to rationalize it or justify. And that's really what I got out of the presence of working with my therapist, and like the Buddhist concept of just, it's what it is. And it's not, I'm not grateful I'm grateful for the growth that I've had, but I'm also, that doesn't mean that I'm grateful that my wife died. Those are things that happened. And I really am grateful for what life has given me out of this. And now I get to, that's one of the things I work with on people is how can you grow out of this? Like take what this new life that you have and live it in a way that you never knew was possible.
Absolutely. And that's, I think, the thing that people get confused about when you'll hear people talk about the gift of grief or the beauty and tragedy. I get people that come to me and say, well, there's nothing beautiful about someone dying. There's nothing beautiful about, there's no gift in that. What are you talking about? That's absolutely not what we're talking about. You are 1,000% correct. There is no beauty and no gift in that. It happened. Now what? And like you said, you would have loved to have had the experience of how you're living now with Melissa, but Melissa was the one that taught you how to live now, right? And so you will never live her life in vain, because you're taking away the lessons you learned being with her, being her husband, the lesson she still teaches you every day as you move forward. And it's, when I talk to people too, I would have much rather had a love and a loss than to have never had that person in my life before. That is more important to me. And if that's not the stage that you're in, because I've also had people that have come to me like that too, of like, I know you just haven't gotten there yet, right? There's going to be a point where you're going to realize that love and that time with that person or that event or whatever it was that shifted everything, was your transformation, will become the beauty that you have. And then the lessons you take away from it are the beauty. That's the gift that the grief teaches you so much. And like you're saying, it's transformative. So if you allow your body and your mind to get to a state of acceptance and perspective shifting, it does become a gift, because there's nothing else that you can do to have stopped what was going to happen. So now you get to choose grief as a gift. And what is that going to mean for your life and your next purpose, and things just being imperfect and it being okay with it, and just going with the flow. And so I love that. I love that we're spending time talking about that, because there is a misunderstanding of what these phrases mean, of like, you guys are nuts. Like there's no beauty in this. There's no gift in this. And really there is. You just have to find it, and you get to find it. That's what somebody like you helps people do.
Right. Yeah. And it's about time, and hopefully with people like me, with helping to kind of draw you to it and see if you can perhaps get there a little bit faster or more completely. But it is, and I think experiences like this, these types of interviews that you're able to provide for people, it's what people can often get out of like support groups, or seeing people who are down the road, can kind of give you hope. Okay, I've seen this enough, I've heard this enough that clearly this happens. I'm not anywhere near there yet, but I now have some hope that on the horizon I might get there. They can't even comprehend of how it's possible, but if there's enough anecdotal evidence from people sharing these experiences, it can hopefully give them the hope that they will get there, or they could get there.
Thank you for saying that, because that is what it is about, sharing our experiences and providing inspiration of where you're at now, and knowing that, I mean, you and I remember that first initial days of never going to feel happy again. I will never feel joy again. Like you just think that that's it. And you're like, you get to a place where you're like, okay, I think I might feel it one day. But then you find hope, right? Then you find other people and you talk. But the more you talk, the more you release it, the more you get it out, then you realize that we all share in this, we all share in grief. And you, as you're transitioning to find your therapist, that's a great example of, if you're not feeling it with one person, right? If maybe the Western medicine isn't working and you want to go towards, Eastern traditions and practices, try a bunch of different types of people, different cultural experiences, different experiences that you never thought that you may try, energy healing, something like that. You never know what's going to hit you, because you are transforming into a new person. So you don't know what's going to hit and land. And in your process of finding the therapist that was right for you, you also came to a mantra and a way of living that he had taught you too. So not only do you find, the gifts in grief, but you also say, don't worry, things will change, which is what it's all about.
He when he told me this, his story, and it's his mantra that he shared with me, like I love it. I share it with everyone. He was telling me how when he was younger in his 20s, he would complain to his friend that he couldn't find a woman, a relationship. He couldn't find someone to be with. He couldn't find a job that he liked. Couldn't find a job. And his friend just said, "Don't worry, things will change." And so then when he was like in his 30s or 40s, he would like, "Oh, well, I'm in this relationship, but it's like we're not doing well. I have this job. I hate it. I don't like what I do." And his friend would say, "Don't worry, things will change." And so then finally he got to a point in his life where he transitioned to being a therapist, and he was in this relationship that he loves, and he was just glowing to his friend about how great everything is going. He has this wonderful relationship. He loves his work, and his friend says, "Don't worry, things will change." And it was so like once you hear that last one, that like,
Yeah.
even when things are going well, to keep that mantra of don't worry, things will change, it really drives home that everything is impermanent. And the attachment, one of the Buddhist teachings is about unattachment, not being attached to things, and that can be hard. I know there's one of Pema Chodron's books. She talks about hopelessness, and some of my the men that I work with, they struggle with the idea of, well, why should I embrace hopelessness? And it's not hope. You're not supposed to be hopeless. You're putting the emphasis on the wrong syllable. It's having hopelessness. It's have hope, but don't necessarily be attached to that outcome. It doesn't mean that you can't have hope, you can't look forward to things. It's just recognize that things may change. And if I look back on my life, nothing that I wanted to have happen or planned to happen has gone the way that I intended it to go. But it's also not necessarily a bad thing. My relationship ending with my first wife led to a better relationship with her and my relationship with Melissa. And those things not going that way has led me to this life. And so none of the things that I've hoped for, but I'm also grateful for the things that I've gotten instead sometimes. And
right. I love, yeah, it's so let's say just your first wife. You think that, okay, I've failed at this. My marriage ended. It's bad. It's negative. Well, look how positive it turned. Look what you learned from it. Look at what the relationship is now. And I bet you if anyone that's watching this goes back and looks in their past and there's situations that seemed super negative, what did that negativity lead you to that was positive? What did it transform into? How did you transform because of it? Did you become a more resilient human being? What was it? Like these things that we constitute as negative turn out to work for us and provide us so much more than we would have seen if we didn't experience them, right? So it's the joy in the lesson too. And I love Pema so much. Like, so if you don't look at it, Pema, you should definitely go and check her out for sure. And then as we close things out, I want to touch on this because I don't think that many people know what this is. So I would like for you to explain, you are also a death doula. Explain what a death doula is.
A death doula is, it's kind of it's the bookend to a birth doula. A birth doula helps the mother and baby enter the world, or helps the baby enter the world working with the mother. And a death doula is someone who helps someone as they're getting ready to leave this world. And it comes from a place of both education and compassion, working with people and their families to prepare for end of life. Some of it is helping the person who's dying know that they can and should have a death experience that they want. So often your family gets wrapped up in either keeping you alive or making sure you're here or there. They want it to be their experience, but really it's about your experience. What would you like to have as your experience? What do you want to have around you? Do you want to have a vigil? Kind of starting to break some of the norms of the funeral industry to help people know what their possibilities are, and to try to make everything just peaceful and comfortable towards the end. And then part of it is also working with their family to be comfortable with death, comfortable with their person passing, and like having peace and being at peace with that. But then also with their process post-death. There's a book called Die Wise by, I think it's a Canadian author, who talks about how in our life, in our culture, we don't, death is very taboo and clinical, and we don't see dead people until we're either at a memorial where there's someone all pretty in a casket, or if there's an accident, a tragedy, but we don't interact with death at all. And it's a very, it makes it really, really jarring for us. And so part of your work as a death doula when someone dies is making sure that they don't look comfortable, so that they look dead, so that when you, as their family, when you see this person, you're not, oh, they're just resting peacefully. It's like, no, they're gone. They have died. And also helping the people, like, know that it's okay to touch them after they've passed. So you can actually, so much of our animalistic core is through sight and touch and feel and smell. And if you can actually like physically recognize that this person has gone, it'll help you with your grief. And then part of it is the education aspect with it, with the family. One of the things I've stopped doing in my work is aside from when I initially meet people, is I try not to use the word loss with people, because when you say I lost my wife, it's, even though logically, and this kind of goes back also to the life reentry work between your emotional and logical brain. Logically, when you say I lost my wife, you know that you didn't do anything wrong. But emotionally, you keep on, every time you say it, you keep on reinforcing, I did this, I did something, there's something wrong with me. And so rather than just say like my wife died, and it might feel a little bit harsh, it might go the way my wife passed, there are things you can do to soften it, but still make it, this happened, not I did this.
Right. That's a great point. That's a really great point to think about too. And I don't think many people think about that side of things, and whatever. Great to transition out of that, because you really do take onus of things that have nothing to do with you, right? It's out of your control, but we want to take responsibility for it. And then we do added pressure and another layer of grief that you do not need to compartmentalize and compound on top of things what you're already going through. So whatever phrase works for you of, my wife, my husband has died, my wife, my husband has passed, whatever feels good to you is what should be said, right? We always allow, well, not always, we tend to allow other people to tell us how we should be speaking to make others feel comfortable. And It's not about that. It's about us being comfortable so that other people can be comfortable in their uncomfortable space. So if it feels good to say, my wife has died, say my wife has died. If that feels better, whatever it is for you, this is your process. And so I love that you shed light on that. And being a death doula is really a beautiful companionship that you create with a family and with somebody. And so if you are uneducated on what a death doula can really do for your life, please look into it, call Brian and find out if this is a fit for you, because it really can be a beautiful process to have somebody walk you and educate you down a really uncharted territory.
It can be, and it shouldn't, like, death shouldn't be clinical and scary. It should be something that it's sad, and it will always be sad, but it still can be a very beautiful passing, and it doesn't have to be traumatic, and it shouldn't be for anyone involved, the person dying, or sometimes it's unavoidable, but if it doesn't have to be, then it shouldn't be. And that's a lot of what a death doula does. And some death doulas are a lot more involved and more like, they have spiritual practices, and there's a whole span of death doula services that people have. I tend to incorporate it more into my grief work. I've only been involved in a couple of deaths, but there's some people who that's everything they do, and they're wonderful people with it.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, we have touched on so much today, and I just cannot thank you enough for this. And I wanted to open up the floor just for any closing thoughts of, your resiliency is very transparent, and you've taught us so much of how to, just in your mantra alone, like, don't worry, things will change, is a great way to approach life, of even in the most celebratory of times, even the most positive of times, that can change. So to always be aware of life and how we get to harness tools to teach ourselves how to move forward in life, no matter what comes our way, right? It doesn't mean it's not going to be hard. It doesn't mean it's not going to suck and it's going to be sad and painful, but things change all the time. And so thank you for teaching us about that type of resiliency and how somebody can look at a perspective of life. But do you have any closing words before we share one last piece of goodness with everybody?
I think just that the gift of grief and beauty and tragedy, it's real, and it's life. And in fact, I don't know many people who have achieved that understanding, that peace in their life, without having some sort of breaking, some sort of tragedy that has brought them to that point. And it's a tough time. It's a tough thing to go through and to experience, and that should never be belittled. And that's not what any of this work is not trying to gloss it over and, this too shall pass, like that type of, it's not that, it's just that when you really can lean into the sharp edges, embrace the yuck of what you're going through and open yourself up to it, that there is such peace and beauty on the other side of that. And that's the hope that we have for everyone. Hopefully the hope that your listeners and everyone can feel when they are going through this, is to recognize that it's not that it gets better, it's that it gets different and peace does come.
Right. Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. And you brought a wonderful gift for everybody today. Want to tell them what that is?
Yes. I mean, anyone who's seen this, I love working with people and trying to share this this concept and this aspect of life. And so anybody who has the link here, I will do like a free session with you. I mean, so much of my own experience we just talked about is of meeting someone, finding someone who you work with, is getting to know them and getting to understand them, and do you work well together? And at the very least, I can in a free hour with anyone, I can at least impart some more of this knowledge and hints at how to find peace and joy in life beyond where you're able to exist now, even if we don't keep working together. It's a free session for anybody who would like to try to learn more about this and me, and how you can live more openly.
That's so wonderful. A full hour with Brian to assess yourself and learn more and like really dig into. That is such a great, thank you so much for that gift. It's a whole hour. That's amazing. We hear a lot of half hours, which is also amazing. It's too, but a full hour of just, you time and getting to know each other and seeing if it's the right fit to move forward is beautiful. Thank you so much for that. Thank you for sharing your story and your life with us and giving us such good, wonderful nuggets of goodness. I'm trying to find the right words. There was so much good in that interview that people can take away. And so I thank you for that. And I thank you for opening up the door for men to find a space to go to and feel okay and feel comfortable. And you can talk or not talk if you don't want to, but talking it out and finding a community of people really does help in a society that wants to kind of shut that down a little bit. So thank you for that work as well. And this was a wonderful interview. Thank you, Brian, so much.
Thank you for doing this, and thank you for having me.
Absolutely. See you guys next time. Bye-bye.